Hello and welcome to another episode of MotorInc First. Today we have a proper hot hatchback, and Kartikeya has just returned from Volkswagen. No, wait, I got confused. The car came from Volkswagen Germany to India, so he didn't have to go anywhere. Where did you drive the car?
Indoor.
In Indore. Indoors, outdoors, but in
Outdoors
Indore.
and indoor. Indoor.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, you went to Nat Tracks.
Yeah.
So you haven't driven this car on the street at all.
We managed to do something so that we would get a sense of what it would be like.
Right.
So that happened. So before we get into the GTI,
Oh, sorry, that's the car we've driven, the
Oh, yeah,
Volkswagen
sorry.
Golf GTI.
oh, I didn't realize we hadn't done that. So before we go there, there's a little bit of a preamble that I want to get into.
Okay.
One of this is of associations, and like because this was my first time at Indore, and it reminded me that I had gone to Bhopal as well, which was the first time, and it just so happened somebody did ask me, "Have you been to Indore before?" I said no, and I thought back to Bhopal and how now it's in my head got locked with the Sonnet that I drove there,
Right.
and then same thing has happened now with Indore and the Golf GTI and the first time at Nat Tracks as well.
Got it.
And that comes to the idea that of the Golf GTI, it's called legendary and it's famous and everything, but I had no emotions attached to it. And
Yeah, it's how I feel about golf in general. The game.
so so this is something I recognize as a maybe it's an advantage or a disadvantage, but until I've driven or experienced something, I can't build up relationships for it. I mean, like an emotion for it.
Yeah.
Despite having known all about it, or not all about it, but a lot about
No,
it.
and
let's
I
say.
think sometimes it's a good thing to do, because if you build it up too far and then you actually experience the bike or the car, whatever it is, and you're like, hey, that's not what everybody was saying it was.
Correct.
Because and sometimes it's not even the vehicle's fault, It's like if you read a British motorcycle magazine talking about a motorcycle which feels awesome in their environment. What the contribution of the environment is not always obvious unless you've been there and experienced that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when that comes here and our roads are completely different, traffic is completely different, and then you're like, it doesn't feel so good at all.
Correct. I think a great example of something like that would be a convertible driving it in California or something like that versus driving it in Mumbai. It's a completely different
Yeah,
experience.
convertibles in Mumbai are awesome for about 3 hours on one day in the entire year, if you're lucky.
So I landed up there for the GTI at the Nat Tracks with a bit of a blank slate. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what to expect from it, except for the fact that this is the GTI and this is the GTI.
So GTI basically to us means this will be a fast car. That's it.
So I was going to ask you, to you, what does it mean? What does the Golf GTI mean? What would you expect from something like it?
To me, it would mean a family hatchback of reasonable size that has been souped up. And usually souping up from a manufacturer can't just be the engine or the frame, it has to be both. So I would assume this car would go around corners faster and it would get to the corners quicker than normal, and then it would brake a little bit higher too. And therefore that would mean the engine has more performance, the brakes are stronger than normal, and the chassis in some way or the other is reinforced to be better around the corners, which to me means your comfort will probably be compromised to some extent.
So you're saying functionally fast, but not like racy zippy, like that kind?
Not necessarily.
Okay, perfect.
That doesn't happen till you add a R or something till the end, right? No?
So awesome. Shumi, you effectively summed up what the Golf is. And for me, it was, I went into a little bit of the history because I generally don't pay much attention to that. But the interesting thing is the Golf has done 50 years. Do you know why the Golf came about?
I don't even know why the game was invented. There's no way I know how the car works, man.
It was a replacement for the Beetle.
Oh, yeah, now I remember. Yes, of course, yeah.
It was a replacement for the Beetle. So effectively, it's a people's car.
Yeah.
In the sense that it's meant to be a practical family car.
Correct.
And
The
that's
base
where
Golf,
it started off.
Yeah.
The base Golf. And that was 74. And the year after that, they came out with the GTI. And GTI stands for Grand Touring Injection. India now. So it started off as a simple, humble car, which became a go faster version.
Correct.
And that was the important context setting that happened in the course of this drive to understand whether GTI actually fits into the Golf family.
Right.
So the Golf GTI is exactly what you said. It is this for Europe, a family car, but a little go faster. So this is what. So a lot of people might be watching this or reading stuff about the GTI and thinking that, man, this is going to be this mental, absolute hot hatch, which is racy and crazy. It's not that. It's not that. Which is why, and in my process of learning about the Golf, I realized that they have a Golf Club Sport, right? Which is a step above the GTI Club Sport, which is a step above the GTI. So the GTI we have in India, remember we spoke in the Tiguan that they didn't bring the 265 PS version of the engine?
Correct.
That's the engine the GTI has.
Right.
But the Club Sport has 300 horsepower. And then there's the R, the Golf R, which has 330 horsepower.
Which is the maxed.
Which is the
Golf.
max, which has all-wheel drive. So that's the Golf in that sense, the really racy and attacky Golf.
Right.
I'm presuming it's that mood because assuming that if this is
Yeah,
their-
but what you're basically saying is this is a 4-step ladder. And the family hatchback Golf, which you should think about as a much larger Polo, if you want to, right, is your base family hatchback. We don't get it in India primarily because it'll be ridiculously expensive to bring it as they make it for Europe.
Yeah.
And if they were to reinvent it for us, I'm not convinced we'd buy a hatchback that expensive, right? Above that is the GTI, which is being imported, I'm assuming.
they have a R line also in between, which
Our line is a trim, more or
Yeah.
less. So I'm ignoring the trims. I'm saying actual changes to performance. So the Golf is your basic hatch with trims and variants. Then you have the GTI, which is what we are getting. Above that is an even faster, slightly more focused version, let's call it, of the GTI itself, which would be called the Club Sport. And above that is the performance Golf, which has least attention paid to practicality and the max performance possible. And that would be the Golf R.
perfect.
Right.
So if you set the expectations like that, then you will enjoy what the Golf GTI is.
Right.
If you go in expecting this to be the R kind of thing, or just imagine it to be like this completely out there hatch, it's not that.
Yeah.
What happened at the Natrax was interesting because the entire event was in the various tracks that they have. 2 tracks effectively that we used. One was the high-speed bowl and the other was a handling track.
How many tracks are there in all?
There are many over there.
18.
I'm not sure why.
It would be appropriate for a Golf to be launched.
So we only used 2. I think there's 17 though. I'm not sure, but I think there's 17. So we used the high-speed track and the handling track.
Okay.
And it was through both of them, the idea that you got off the car was incredibly competent, incredibly quick, very, very capable. But if you start, okay, we'll get to that later. Let's now I'll take you through what happened at the event.
Okay.
And because I think some of the emotions are tied to that. First and foremost, we got there in the evening. And so when the car was unveiled, my first thought was, man, that nose is so low. Like the front, the silhouette of the car, if you look at it, the front is so low profile, right? It really does, it takes you by surprise that, this is a hatch, but this is like a low form.
Yeah. Also, I think as a contrast, we are seeing SUVs one after the other. So you're used to these fat, chunky noses. So when a hatchback goes, it does strike you.
It's
extra.
really like a flattened nose, and you automatically think that, man, ground clearance is going to be an issue on this. And on paper, what they've shared is 136 mm. And the interesting thing is, between the wheels, the ground clearance doesn't seem to be an issue. It's not like massive, of course, but it doesn't seem to be an issue. So we went and peeked under. It's actually the chin that extends a bit, right? So that was a thought, like, is this really going to be usable in our conditions, right? That was.
But Volkswagen hatchbacks using their chins to kiss the road after every speed breaker is not unheard of, is it?
Which one are you thinking of?
Polo.
If you were not careful with the brakes, for sure, yeah, you can do that. But in this case, of course, the suspension setup is different, so that also we'll come to. And so looking at the car, the first thing was that, man, that face looks sharp. One of the things was that. The rest of the body style is quite VW in that sense. It's looking sporty, I feel now. And I don't know if that's something by default I expect from VWs, but they are doing more of that. If you look at the past Golfs or even the Polo, it used to be a very simple, clean and classy design. This has a bit of that aggression in its face. It has the GTI badges. And my God, like remember we were talking the Tiguan, that the dashboard has this panel which is backlit and stuff like that. The Golf on the nose has an illuminated VW logo. Yeah.
I'm so excited.
Correct. So these are the small things which, with the rest of it being classy and, you know, still classy, but like those few highlights, you're like, that's not quite what I expect from VW. But anyways.
But when you do go to 5-star hotels where you expect people to be really classy, and then you go to a wedding and listen to the music that's playing in the wedding, the same feelings.
ठीक है. Though, yeah, it's moving with the times, let's say. Though that was the only thing in terms of when I looked at the car.
Sorry, I have to object to you moving with the times comment.
Why?
Volkswagen was the king of making timeless designs which
Yeah.
would not age fast.
Correct.
Which would feel like, wow, it's been 10 years.
Yeah.
Wow, it looks new.
Yeah,
They were the masters of that.
correct. Absolutely.
For them to say keeping with the times, that's quite a come down.
It is. It is. And in that regard, the one thing I will give them, the one thing I liked was like they have this fog lamp design, which is basically 4 or 5 different LEDs, which are parked in the bumper in this staggered, star-shaped pattern. And that first catches your attention. You're like, that's a bit odd. And then you realize over time that that's actually quite cool.
Okay.
So that was one of the things that I liked on the face straight up. Rest of the design is clean. There's nothing for me to really talk about the design except that it's a long hatch.
Yeah, it's a big car.
It's a big hatch. And if we have to get the cabin part of it out of the way, let's
do it.
Let's just do that. Again, no ventilated seats, no powered seats. All of that is manual, and which was a sticking point in the Tiguan. But here, you think it's okay. Because considering it's the GTI, the only car of its kind in India, it's like, okay, fine, I can look past that. It's not really getting in the way of the car being what it is meant to be.
I mean, it's supposed to be a hot hatch. You might as well sweat a little inside, right?
So those couple of things, you have the same kind of infotainment system in this, like we saw in the Tiguan, but a smaller size, 13-inch. So what I mean by that is it's a smaller screen, but the layout that they used in the Tiguan, where they had the 2 bars at the bottom,
constant
and the
bars.
Yeah, so that's there as a standard part. And in terms of the quality aspect, it doesn't have that weird drive selector. It has a small little toggle here on the center console, so you don't have that weird interaction point. But and this is another interesting thing that happened the other day when I was flying back from Nagpur. I met somebody from the MotorInc family. His name is Dhananjay, and he came to me and he said that, you know, I want to talk to you. I bought the Slavia.
Okay.
And he said, I know you don't like the Slavia. I said, you know what, I got to clarify that it's not that I don't like the Slavia, but I think higher of the brand.
Yeah,
Right?
the product doesn't talk to where we think the brand has gone to.
right.
It's the same with the CB350. It has to do with the fact that we respect what Honda does, but the CB350 doesn't pay respect to what the brand is capable of is the problem, not the CB350 itself.
So we had a very interesting conversation, and I said, do you think I should be, because one of the points he brought up was, what else offers a better experience or is at that level? I said, agreed. But do you want me to talk down the brand to that point so that what made it special is no longer referenced to?
Correct.
They said, no, that's what after this discussion, he said, I respect that because I knew what I was getting into then.
Right.
And he made a very interesting point. He said, I owned a Polo. And after that, I bought the Slavia. So now when I rate the interior of the Slavia, I would give it a 7.5. This is an owner who said that in 2 months has done 20,000 kilometers in his
nice.
Slavia and enjoys driving it. So I'm glad he shared that. Thanks for that. And what he said in that was, if I hadn't owned the Polo earlier,
Right.
this would have felt all right.
Correct.
And that's a distinction I want to make now. If somebody's stepping into this car today or into the Tiguan,
Right.
they're going to get in and feel that this is fine.
Yeah.
But all those people who've been Volkswagen loyalists,
Correct.
right? They're going to look at this differently.
Sure.
So there was this time when you could take a VW and say that, you know, in terms of quality, it's on par with the luxury brand.
Yeah.
Right? And it's only the badge that's different.
Right.
But today you can see that that's not the case. It is going to be a step below. You could say it's fine, like we said, that, you know, okay, it's a VW at the end of the day. But that difference, existing VW or past VW owners will look at and see the difference and feel the difference.
And I think there is a point to be made here also about how sometimes we see you disagreeing with us in the comments. And that's okay, of course.
Yeah.
But the interesting part is, remember that when we experience the best version of a thing we've ever experienced, that's the limit of how much we know about that thing, and that's as much opinion as we can have, right? So I am at, I don't know, 5,000 motorcycles later, and he's 5,000 motorcycles and 10,000 cars later, or whatever. So we are coming at a place where we've seen Volkswagens that are at the bottom and Volkswagens that are at the top, models that will never come to India, and Volkswagen is using as a global halo car, like the Phaeton or something like that. And that informs you about the overall ability of this brand when they choose to do things that are considered extensions, which they're trying something. Maybe it will work, maybe it won't. But in one way, a Bugatti was a brand extension of Volkswagen. It was the same group. And Bugatti would say, if we do this in titanium, our customers would enjoy it. But that same button would appear in fake titanium made out of plastic in a polo or golf or something, right? This spectrum is possible. When you are at this part of the spectrum, you have a sense of this in plastic works well, doesn't work, whatever. You don't know what it does when it gets to titanium. Neither do we. I mean, we've only driven a Bugatti. We were both together and we drove it 100 kilometers or something. I don't know, right? But therefore, if you ask me about phones, which I have used a lot of, but all Apple devices, I don't know what Android phones are good, bad, or ugly. I have no reference point. Right? So when we see you disagree with us a comment, sometimes we are a little bit amused by it, I will admit, because you can see that you love the idea of it. We can see that you're either thoroughly enjoying this product or not thoroughly enjoying the product. But the basis on which you form the decision is 2 steps down a 5-step ladder, and you can't see the 3 steps yet. And then the challenge becomes, how do I show you those 3 steps without feeling like I'm talking down to you or trying to become preachy or like a teacher instantly, right? Sorry. So the point is,
No, I think just to wrap that up, I think which is why we'll always say, even if it is not to make a purchase, go and experience the product. Then you can decide for yourself. Otherwise, you're just going by what somebody else has said or opinion you formed.
Yeah, and sometimes you get this comment saying the test rides are too short. That's because you're thinking a test ride is going to confirm your decision. I'm always going to say, let the test ride cancel a decision. It is a far easier and more powerful way to do it. And I discovered this because Aarti and I, my wife, we couldn't decide what to eat. It was easier to decide what we didn't want to eat today than to decide what to order today. Right? So when this discussion would start saying, okay, I have the menus with me. And at that point we had menus, we didn't have an app. And I was like, no, not Chinese. So 3 menus removed, right? I would say not Italian. So then 2 more menus removed, and then you'd be left with whatever. And it's very easy to make that decision there. Sorry.
So, where were we?
We were talking about how to approach the cabin experience of this car based on what you think of Volkswagens, especially people who've driven Polos versus, and you gave the example of how the Slavia's cabin can be considered a good cabin. But if you've seen previous Skodas, that's a little bit harder in terms of being the conclusion that you'd reach.
Correct. So that's just, again, perspective setting about what expectations you can and should have. And on its own, without the baggage of history, if you look at this cabin, it's a good cabin. Can you say that it's out and out plush even for the price point? No, it's not. There's plenty of hard plastics around and all of that. But everything looks and feels good. Right, so that's fundamentally where the cabin is at. One of the things that I'm glad for, what we're getting is the Mark 8.5 Golf, right? So this is a half update, so it were, because you remember the Tiguan had no buttons,
right.
So this has a few buttons which are capacitive, so there's no clickiness, which is annoying, and those are shortcuts for you to get into the to select the drive modes and stuff like that. And the steering also used to have those, but they got so much flack for it that in this 8.5 they've gone back to the standard steering wheel that we see on the VWs that we see in India as well, that same design and layout with the proper clicky buttons. They've got that. So in some ways, they fixed a part of it, but part of the problem remains.
Okay.
So, yeah. So the cabin, front seats, not ventilated. They are heated, not motorized, but the seats themselves are great. The back seat, let's just say it's not a car you'd buy for the back seat, but it's there. There's enough space for even taller people to sit there, but I don't think they'd really be comfortable there for longer distances and stuff like that. The boot is massive. The boot is really big. That's usable. So that's the cabin experience part of it. I'm going to just leave it at that. And let's be clear that we spent time with the car in all of this, everything put together by, say, about 3.5, 4 hours, which is not usually, we spend a lot more time and in all different kinds of scenarios. So this is a kind of like a limited view on the car. focusing on how much fun to drive is it really, right? So that's the bottom line. So that night after the unveil, VW had set up a couple of things for you to do, and one of which was a drag race, and it was that it's an automatic, so there's really not much for you to do. But I think the interesting thing in that was that from the first to the last, the gap was so narrow. There were two cars, and they were just cycling around. People were getting in and out of them, and the gap was so narrow. So the consistency of the performance in that scenario was interesting. It was really good to see, because that's one of the harshest kind of use cases for a car, right? Where you're just constantly going and boom, dropping it and going. So that was good to see straight up. And then we also went out onto the high-speed bowl at night. Nothing much to talk about that from that instance, except that this one actually has the active lights, the IQ lights, which the Tiguan doesn't.
Right.
So even in the banking, when you're steering it a little bit, actually not in the banking, before that, when you're entering, you can see the lights swivel a little bit. So it was good to see that this one has it.
Got it. Is it making enough difference for you to think, maybe the R-Line Tiguan should also have had it?
I think it's a slight advantage, but that when you have that, especially in our kind of conditions, even if it illuminates a bit more of the corner when you're traveling on unfamiliar roads, it's an advantage.
So not a must-have, good to have.
Yeah. So this car has it, and it's good to see. And the other thing that it doesn't have is the dynamic chassis or the adjustable suspension. So like we had said with the Tiguan, again, some of these things are coming down to cost. Some of these things are coming down to availability. So what is available for being sent to the Indian market? So it's a combination of those factors, which is why we're not getting the dynamic chassis DCC Pro, as they call it, right? So that's the basic lay of the car.
Right.
It's a front wheel drive. This is the all wheel drive is only the R.
Right.
And so that brings us to the next day. Early morning, we were at Natrex, and we were first to go out onto the handling track.
Okay.
And that's where you can say that you start understanding where the halo around the GTI comes about.
Right.
Because, front wheel drive cars with this much power, when you're driving them hard, the problem invariably is understeer. Right? Now, this thing is surprisingly sharp. It's surprisingly direct. And so what I mean by that is, when you're going into a corner, typically you're going to be light on the throttle so as to not overwhelm the front tires, and then slide out, right? In this, it's amazing how much you can stay on the power and play with the line. Yeah, and it continues to hold. And not just that, you can play with the line, saying that I'm going to use more power now. Like, you can change how much you're doing. And it was like, wow, this is cool. Like, I get it. And this handling track, the interesting thing is, it was not a racetrack. So the grain of tarmac was the coarser variety that you have on a regular road.
Right.
And the track was actually surrounded by what would be like a normal highway surroundings. So it had mud, not smooth mud. Some places there were rocks.
Bisleri bottles.
Huh?
Bisleri bottles.
No, thankfully
Discarded plastic bags.
No, not that real.
Plates,
no. But there were plenty of rocks to do damage in case you got things wrong. So it created a very real world scenario in which you were driving the car. It didn't have potholes though. Some of the corners had curbs which had these nice big ribs on it to test out the suspension a bit. So it was an interesting place to get to know the GTI, because that for me set the context that if you were to take this and drive it on a racetrack, you would come away saying that this is a great car, but it's not gonna hit the spot.
Right.
But if you were to think about it as a car that you're gonna drive on the road and drive it quickly, it's going to be an immensely satisfying car.
So good for the enthusiast.
Yes.
As long as they don't get too serious about it.
Exactly. Because the day you start thinking racetrack, then you're going to want one of the more serious Golfs. And this is not that. This is meant to be a car, a family car that's also fun to drive.
Right.
So practical enough to live with every day. And that's the bottom line about this car for me. That you can have fun, and people who are buying this are going to drive this on the road, travel with it, and they will still be able to enjoy it.
Right.
Now, in this, the one thing is that yes, we drove it on a test track which didn't have potholes, but there were two situations. One with the curbs. You'd expect going over those curbs. You know what it feels like going over curbs in a tight car, right? You'll go.
The whole thing jars. Yeah.
It didn't do that. And the other thing was, there was this one place near one of the event areas where there was this large plastic carrier, so to speak, through which cables were running. And it was, I think I may have a pic of it, just to size it up. It was that high.
Yeah, I know exactly how high, because I just came back from somewhere where they were using those to represent speed breakers.
Acha.
And there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them.
So going over it, it cleared it easily enough. And going over it, it didn't feel as, how should I put it? It didn't feel as evil as I expected it could be.
There is absorption.
Yes. So the rear, what surprises you is that the rear doesn't have any give. The rear is as tight as the front. And that's one of the reasons why in those corners, in that handling track section,
you can do so much.
Yeah.
You can do so much.
Because you could just turn it in and the rear would follow nice and tight. It was a very enjoyable experience. And why? What are the granular things I would think about that would make it racier and fizzier? The steering, for instance, direct. It's direct. And the thing is, because it was a narrow track and it was broken up into sections. So I was using one section of it. So at the end of it, there were cones and you had to make a U-turn. And you'd go there and turn it. And you realize when you turn it in further, it turns in quicker.
Right.
So it turns in really quickly. So I think it has a variable geometry steering rack.
Like it, yeah.
So once you turn off the center, it starts getting quicker and it feels really sharp then. So that steering does a fantastic job of pointing you, but that sense of granularity of feedback is not that much.
Correct.
Same thing for the engine. Awesome performance, and it was going on being driven hard, and it was just strong, right? In sport mode, there's a more direct throttle feel. When you're in the normal mode, comfort,
It's a little bit more relaxed.
so like, you know how the modern turbo engines, they can manage to hold the boost so that you don't have that lag when you're going on and off.
Right.
It manages to do that nicely. But is it absolutely razor sharp? No, it's not.
It's not that car.
Yeah. Same thing for the gearbox. It's quick.
Yeah.
It does the job well. Again, is it that tearing speed of shifts? No, it's not that.
Correct.
It's an overall quick and enjoyable car. In pretty much any scenario, you can put it out on the road.
Yeah.
Brakes powerful. Feel okay. We did some runs when we were later on the high-speed bowl section where we brake from 200 because we can, right?
Yeah.
So from 200 we pop. The way it goes, like the way it brakes is phenomenal. And we did 2 runs. We did 1 run, just took a turn back, got back some speed. I said, let's cool the brakes a little bit, and then went in again. But within a span of 5 minutes, just straight from 200 back to 0.
Yeah. And it's not a super cool place in the sense of the weather is not helping the brakes.
No. Even though we started early, by the time we were done from the handling track section, it was already hot. And that's hour and a half into 2 hours into the day, right?
Yeah.
So it was definitely not, this was done on the high-speed track. So this was much later in the day. So it was definitely hot by then. So it was not easy conditions for sure. Right?
No, and in fact, just to give you a reference, when the first Lancer Evolutions came out, it was the same story. It was not the most powerful car and it was not the sharpest car and it didn't have awesome brakes. It had a very nice blend of feeling sporty and feeling useful enough for a family with a 4-door sedan, as it were. Once the culture for the Lancer began, then the real tuning started and the really super sharp and fast Lancers came. And in some ways, Mitsubishi came into the trend later. But even at Evolution 6, they weren't super hardcore cars. They were cars where you knew that you could get very hardcore with the base frame without major expenses started.
Right.
And that is the key to what he's trying to describe. He's saying, think of it as a very sporty, very satisfying hatchback to drive, but don't think of it as a racy hatchback to drive, because that will set your expectation in the wrong place.
Correct. Because the reason why I'm going on establishing that is because for people who've just seen this as a poster car, right? Or the badge, right? For them, it can be anything.
Yeah.
But what is it in reality is this, what you said, sporty, not racy.
Yeah. So if you think about the Golf as volume level 2 on a very nice music system, you've only turned the volume up 2 notches so far. The Club Sport adds another 2 notches, and the R is where this particular production Golf line gets maxed up. So the GTI is a very big badge, but it's not a very fast Golf. It's a nice and sporty Golf.
And I have to maybe in that sense admit my fault in this, because I have a friend, Hemant, he was studying in the US, and you have to hear him talk, man, because he was there when he was studying and then later started working after that. And he had an R32. And the way he keeps talking, my R32, my R32, right? And he talk about conditions when it's snowing and this and that and whatever, but he's still continuing to use the car, right? Now that comes from the ability of having that all-wheel drive. That comes from the ability of having that additional power, like that emotion that it creates.
And,
right?
and youth goggles are very rosy indeed.
Sorry?
Youth goggles are very rosy. I know, I've done it. For the longest time, I thought the KB125 was like ice cream on wheels, man. You couldn't go wrong with it. And in hindsight, wow, you could really go wrong with it.
So I think some of the legendary status that is applied to all the Golfs comes from maybe some of the halo aspects of it. But this is a version which is just easy to live with and yet have a lot of fun with.
Understood.
And so that was I think, the summary of the car. And we spent time on the high-speed bowl. We had 20 minutes there, 15, 20 minutes.
Thank God.
You know,
I would have done 5 and I said, okay, I get it.
I left in 2.
Yeah, that's it.
I did 2. Because it could have been an interesting test for the car. But to be honest, like we've driven at 2 high-speed facilities like this. One is Mahindra's and this is the second one, right? And the Mahindra one, we've driven the electrics over there, the BE, and prior to that, the XUV. So when you enter the banking section, right, you have to manage a bit. You have to...
The transition zone.
Yeah, you have to manage a bit, you have to scrub speed and then build your speed once you're onto the banking and stuff like that. So there is stuff to learn about the car in that process. This facility's banked section is steep. Don't get me wrong, it is steep, but it is so long and it is so flowing that within 1 lap, you were entering the banked section at flat out.
Yeah.
Which was an indicated 267, which is, I would say, the true speed of this car is capped at 250. That's just speed of error.
And that's a very common thing for Volkswagen to cap it to 250. That's, a lot of their cars are capped at 250.
And I just want to make this as a point that track shows nothing about your ability. It shows the ability of the car. And I have this brief, small little clip where I had my colleague Vivek in the car in the back and we were just chatting and I was like, I'm not going to do any more laps now in this, I'm done. And he's like, yeah, it's easy, kya? Like, you know, in that. And I just picked my hands up while we were on the banking at 267, right?
Because the banking effectively counteracts everything and makes the car effectively going
and the car is just driving itself. So there's nothing for me to evaluate in that except saying that, yeah, it's stable.
You should have gone to the VRDE facility
instead
of going to the Natrax facility. The banking has warped.
I've heard stories.
And the bottom is unwarped and the top has warped.
Have you done a 24-hour thing
We
there?
did a 24-hour thing in a Hyundai Verna. And I was one of the drivers.
That must have been exciting.
Yeah, so the decision that you had to make was we're up on the banking. And this thing is maxed out because you're trying to set a distance. I think this record thing is just, honestly, it's dumbass. But point is we were trying to set this record or whatever. And it's dumbass Giri primarily because it achieves absolutely nothing for you. All vehicles are fundamentally reliable today. I don't know what the hell the big point is. Anyway. So you get up on the banking and you're like this and whatever, it's 130, 40 kmph, whatever it is. You have to decide whether you want to go through the bumps
or dodge them
or go down and come back up.
Oh my God.
And we had a bunch of racing drivers and we had us and each of us had to make that call. Until I think, was it Vishnu? I'm not sure who, but one of the guys say, listen guys, this is just not worth it, just go through it. So what happens is, in physics terms, you're just hitting a large pothole. It makes no sense. But when you're like this, and the car bounces like this, you don't know how to react to it the first time. Because it's physically bouncing like this, but it feels like it bounced like that. And that sort of tilting of your horizon, as it were, really freaks you out. And after the third lap, you don't even remember it anymore. You just know, oh, there comes that section, I'm going to bounce a little bit.
Oh, wild.
So I've driven that, and I think when we went to see the first Genesis, we went to Namyang plant, and in Namyang plant we drove something on the bank track. I have just no clue which Hyundai it was, and it's one of the most boring things you'll ever do, because you'll be like, that's it.
Yeah, seriously. So that was the high-speed section.
Riding bikes on bank tracks is a lot more fun, actually, which we also did.
You did that
The
as well?
Harley
At BRD?
Davidson.
I don't know. You did that.
What was it? If you know what Harley Davidson was, leaving me a comment. Nightster, Night Rod, something. No, Nightster, I think.
At PD?
I was at Power Drift, and we were setting a 24-hour distance record or something. And this is the facility that Hero has in their Jaipur facility.
Yeah, if it's tighter, smaller, it definitely gets more
No,
exciting.
the fun was the setup and testing, not the actual record. Because in setup and testing, I remember entering the thing at 165 or something. And it was a few laps later. It was like cold. Cold, I think, was 90 kilometers into the entry. And I knew already that a bank basically replicates a flat road without having to replicate a flat road, which is that kind of stupidly long, right? So I know what is going to happen is nothing. But it takes you a moment to get up to. Plus, Harley Davidson, brand new bike, not familiar, etc., etc. In testing, we hit it at 167. And so did Vijay, the Rajputana Customs Vijay. He was there, and 2 or 3 other people. But when we set the record, they said you can't go in that fast because it's eating the tires alive.
Yeah.
So you have to go much slower. So we were timed per lap, which would give you a guide to how fast you were riding. And if you went too fast, then there'd be a board saying too fast, slow down. So then your banking angle entry would be 130 or something.
Right.
What freaks you out on a motorcycle is that there's no shell around you. So the barrier sits like this, and that does disturb you until you learn to ignore it, because it's here and you're looking there. So it's like in your peripheral moving all the time. But in a car, honestly, it's not
So
a big deal.
after we were done with this, so we want to take some pics on the banking. So we went to the middle part of it. And again, the sections were cordoned off. That was just for us. So there was nobody coming through, anything like that. So the car's parked there. And to open the door on the wrong side, it was like you're pushing it. And when I was opening it, I was like, I hope it doesn't come back down. It'll chop my leg in half because it's that kind of steep. So, and when I walked up afterwards to the car, it felt like you were actually climbing up.
All fours,
Yeah, it was steep, man.
Yeah, and the steep is only to define what speed you can replicate the feeling of going straight on. That's literally its purpose, right? So I'm saying this road goes straight for 2 kilometers, you can go as fast as you like. But this is not something we can keep on making, because eventually you need to go faster than this. So if I build a bowl that is at that angle, that might give you the ability to infinitely in time do 120, let's say. But if I want to say that, no, I want to do 250 infinitely, then it has to go like this and like this. And we're basically creating a flat road with the sharpness of the angle. So they will sometimes tell you, you're not going fast enough to be on top of the banking. You go further down the banking, because that's the design speed of that particular angle. This is at 250 or 260 or whatever it was.
So the highest lane is for, I think, 160 plus. And then is the third lane, second lane, first lane. It's like that. They're all depending on what speed you're traveling at.
If the angle isn't enough, it's not steep enough, and he was in a fast enough car, then he would actually have to start to steer and correct, because the car would constantly try to exit the bowl.
So when we were driving there at night, and at that time the speed was, they were holding it at 200. We had a lead car. And at 200 in the fastest lane, you were actively steering it up the slope.
Correct. Because it wants to go back down.
It actually wants to go down.
Correct.
At that point, maybe we were not at 200, maybe at 160 or something like that. But I remember having to give slight inputs to keep it centered. Correct. Otherwise, it would want to drop down.
Yeah, exactly.
So the high-speed track really just showed that the composure of the chassis and suspension at speed is immense. Like it felt absolutely effortless. There was no sense of strain. There was no any kind of thought that you had to give saying that I'm doing 200 or 260?
And it should not also come to you as a surprise because of a little bit of context. When Germans build their cars, they have to remember that their autobahns still have sections which have no speed limits.
Unrestricted, yeah.
Which means as humorless as the Germans can look to the world at large, they are nuts. And there will be a guy who will buy that thing and drive it maxed out.
Yeah.
And he will not be doing it for the jollies, which means I did it on this Saturday. He will be doing it, or she will be doing it on their commute to work, which means this car will get maxed out on a routine basis. And therefore, it feeling confident at those speeds is crucial if you want to sell that car in Germany.
Yeah.
Right? I think at Bugatti at that event, there was a car in service, which we weren't allowed to see, which the owner was using as a daily driver.
Yeah.
And he was going between two places in Germany, and he was on the Autobahn, and it has an unrestricted stretch in it. So this is one of those Veyrons which have a really high performance use case, and it is being used like that. It is not being driven to the club in the night. It is being commuted on.
Yeah.
And there was another Porsche at a 911 at a Boxster event, where it was one of the media department people, senior guy, old man, British guy, I'm forgetting his name, and he was suddenly called to Stuttgart. And we were in Austria at the Lake Wuttersee. I don't remember the name of the town itself. And he said, I'll just pop to Stuttgart and come. And he had an old 911. So I was like, pop to Stuttgart, right? Because you're effectively going another country. And he was like, well, actually, I live like 160 miles from my office, but there are unrestricted stretches of Autobahn. So this 14-year-old or 15-year-old 911 was being maxed out on a daily basis on a commute. Okay, he's a media person from the media departments. Obviously, if he's having trouble, he won't tell us. But his point was, he's been doing that for that length of time, and he claims all he's done is service. But the point I'm making in this context is the GTI Golf is sold in Germany, and therefore it being stable and safe feeling at 267, you said?
Yeah, that's indicated, 250.
At 250 kilometers an hour is very much important to that market.
Yeah. So, yeah, it did all of that without breaking a sweat.
Cars can't sweat, Kartik.
You can, and
because of no ventilated seats. I know. I heard you.
No, I did sweat a little bit because there was one hiccup. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I had got a sense of something similar in the Tiguan.
Okay.
I had taken it to this road that I like to drive on, and it's narrow, it's windy, and basically at certain points, what I got was a slight sound from the steering, right? It goes like when you're putting in some lock and it has some load on it, it makes this sound like almost like a resonance sound, and it does that whichever way you steer it. The same thing happened with the GTI as well, and on the handling track, the steering actually backed up.
Oh,
yeah. So I think it overheated, and what it needed was then I switched the car off once. It didn't really help. But then I was almost done. So I took the car back to where the parking lot was and I parked it there. And we left it switched off. And that was again my car for the high-speed section.
Right.
So that full switch off and start up again, reset it. But that did happen. And I don't see why that should happen. Right? Irrespective of whether it's a GTI or not. So this was something that did happen. And I don't think this is I don't know if the two things are interrelated, right? The sound and this happening, but that did happen. And that did make me sweat a bit because then I had a dry steering to work with.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was basically.
So that's Karthik's very subtle way of telling you, if you buy a GTI, do not be obnoxious and put an irresponsibly loud exhaust on it. Then you won't hear if there is a potential problem with your steering at all, and everybody else will think, oh my God, that's that guy with the loud exhaust.
And oh yeah, we didn't talk about the exhaust. Thanks for bringing it up. So the exhaust is nice. It's not too loud. It's fruity. It's right. Yeah, it's fruity. You can call it fruity. The interesting thing is that they have a system that pipes in sound into the cabin. And no, I'll tell you what. Because that was my reaction. I was like, why the hell? So I had enough time to fool around with it. And in comfort, it's, I think, whatever the car sounds like. And when you go into sport, it pipes in a bit of bass. It's not so obvious. So it's not like...
So it's like all the cars are Need for Speed.
So that would be bad. That would be bad. It's the reason why I'm pointing this out is when you read this, you'll think that that's a crappy thing to do.
But it sounds good from inside, doesn't it?
You don't notice it as much. It just fills up the cabin a bit.
Oh, it's the R which will have the proper things piped into the car.
Probably.
And it's the GTI, which is like, yeah, okay, give you a sense of flavor a little bit. And
Just subtle,
that's it.
just make it subtly more. Because think about it. If it's actually your daily driver and you're doing those kind of
Yeah, you don't want
commutes,
that much noise
you
inside
don't
the cabin.
want it
Yeah,
to be
yeah,
that
absolutely.
noisy. So yeah, so there was I was looking out for it, thinking that this is going to be off-putting, and in this also they have an individual mode. So if you don't want that, you can switch it off in your individual mode and still have the other sporty settings in place. But I didn't feel the need for that at all. It felt fine. It was okay. It just
So it added a little bit of flavor to your experience
Yeah.
without interrupting your experience. So I think we are doing
without it feeling artificial. I think that was the key thing, right? That even if it amps it up, sometimes when it's artificial, like I think some of the early BMWs, when they had this sound thingy, you could feel it like that there's a sound that's being piped in.
Yeah.
That used to spoil the experience. Here it's almost like I can't make out, so it's okay.
It's like the Camry hybrid preparing for takeoff every time you reverse it.
Why?
When some spaceship is about to take off and you're like, oh, it's just a Camry.
Yeah. And before we get to the price, couple of small things. Under the floor, the space for a spare wheel.
Full size, no. Space saver.
But there was no spare wheel there at all, so I don't know. We've asked VW whether there is a spare wheel
Kartik, it
available or
looks
not.
like storage, but they've reduced the weight of the car and give you additional storage space.
Super Leggera, plus more practical. That was one thing. And what else?
So, now to the Mexican part of this conversation. Quesadilla.
Quesadilla. 53 lakhs mein diya.
That's expensive. I have no frame of reference for this.
If you just consider that the Tiguan is less than it, it feels more expensive for a car that's smaller and whatever, right?
Right.
Doesn't have all-wheel drive and as much space, right? But if you look at what the prices are for the GTI in UK, for a similar spec of car, you'd be at about 40 something lakhs, 46, 47 lakhs. So 53 lakh price point from that yardstick is fair.
Okay.
I mean, considering that it's still being brought in and whatever is required for the Indian conditions, etc. Right? So that being done in 53 lakhs is all right. It's not an inexpensive car. If we had to start thinking about what else could I get for this kind of money, I'm not going to be looking at a Mini Cooper or something like that. This is a more all-round car than the Cooper would be. Then you'd be looking at something like the BMW M340i. Right, which is 75 lakhs. So
got it. Okay.
It's 50% more, let's say. Right, it also has 50% more power, and all that is 360 or something like that. Not 50%, but more.
Right.
So it is a more expensive car. It is a more even more practical car that way, but it is a lot more money. So there's really nothing else in this space.
Yeah, but I can imagine somebody buying an M340i as their primary daily driver because it has the aura and the performance and you can be chauffeur driven, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine a GTI being your primary
Yeah.
ownership vehicle, which is why to me the price is whatever it is and it's not super critical to this car.
Correct. It is not, because the people who buy this will be buying it because they want a Golf GTI.
Right.
How many such people are there in India? Great question, because
Tell us.
VW say they're bringing in 150 cars and they already all sold out.
Yeah.
They will look to get another 100, which will happen later this year, towards the end of this year. So that's where that's at. The last thing I want to deal with is that this car is fabled for not having understeer, right? And I'm going to say that this is an amazing car to drive. I want that to be clear. I have not raved and fizzed about this car, but please understand, this is a car that reminded me how a simple car can be so joyous as well.
Sure.
Right? It is that car. I get why the Golf GTI has the status that it has in other markets, where it is a mass market car and where people can still access it and still enjoy the fun of driving without it getting too serious or too impractical. It's a super car for sure.
Superb car, not super car.
And in that, it is famed for not having understeer. And we've got some footage of when we were on the handling track, and you can do so much with it. It really is a lot of fun. But understeer, it can do. And the easiest way of doing it, the dumbest way of doing it is you enter into a corner slow,
And then
and
gas
then
it.
gas it,
Correct.
right? Because then when it kind of wakes up, then it just pushes out.
Yeah.
But if you were to go the other way around, and that's how it likes to be driven. If you go through the process the other way, you enter in fast, like at the right speed. It's a hot speed. You're braking, getting it tidied up, and then you go into the corner with the throttle on. It works.
Right.
So it is very good, but no understeer. That's
It's legend.
yeah, that's physics defying stuff. So
Right.
that's basically it, and that's the Golf GTI. And super happy to have understood what the Golf family is, and especially this line.
So you don't remember the Golf GTI?
What do you mean?
We'll come back to this after the quick summary. He's forgotten the Golf GTI.
Huh?
There was a Golf GTI we experienced together and he's forgotten it. No worries. We'll come back to
Really?
it. Yes.
Okay, let's do this.
After the quick summary.
Okay.
Okay. So Volkswagen is importing 150 Golf GTIs into India. They intend to import about 100 more later. These 150 are apparently already spoken for or sold out and will be delivered to customers. Kartik has just finished driving the car in limited set of conditions, we must say. There was a handling track at Natrax.
Can I interrupt you?
Sure.
Because that's the one thing now as soon as you said it, I remembered that what we did was we took the car outside of those two tracks within Natrax's facilities, the entry road, which has some potholes, and then we found this one side road which is completely broken.
Right.
And that reaffirmed that this is still livable. It is firm.
Right.
So in the back seat when I was sitting there, Arun Chinoy from Kartikeya was driving while I was sitting in the back, and we swapped around.
Right.
And when I was in the back, you constantly get this sense that you're moving, but it's not uncomfortable. So
it.
it's still usable.
Got it. So in limited conditions where they did what they could, but the primary agenda was to drive on the high-speed track to see the car maxed out. It will show 267 on the dials, but these kind of Volkswagen cars are generally electronically limited to 250 kilometers an hour. So the speedo will overread, obviously, and it sounds about right. And at those speeds, the stability of the car, how predictable and trustworthy it feels is unquestionable. And in the same breath, I don't think that's a surprise. Volkswagen does this in their family cars anyway. So a GTI being able to do that with additional suspension, etc., is not really a surprise. It's a good thing to have, and it was enjoyable. So enjoyable that after about a couple of laps of this, basically Kartik said, this is, okay, we are done here, right? Now, what we should remember is the GTI badge is a very, very powerful and big aura-laden badge for Volkswagen, but this Golf is not the top performance Golf. This is the second from bottom performance Golf, as it were, because you have the basic Golf, which is like a large family hatchback, above which is the hallowed GTI, above which is something called the Club Sport, and that's Club Sport, one word, not Club Sport. Right, and above that is the actual hottest Golf, which is called the Golf R, which is about 330 bhp.
Yeah.
This car is 270.
265. Yeah.
This car is a 265 bhp, so it is genuinely a hot hatch, but the agenda is to have fun in the car rather than create the sportiest, most raw, racing-oriented experience possible. And therefore, a lot of the design of this car in terms of suspension setup, in terms of brake setup, in terms of how the engine performs, is designed to let you have fun and say, hey, I have a fast car, without your practicality going away from you as you do these kind of changes. As Kartik said, they found a broken road inside the facility, which they went on, and he was driven in the car and he drove in the car, and there was movement inside the car to let you know that you were driving something sporty, but not to the point where you got uncomfortable, right? I would be willing to bet that if you had a Golf R instead on that same road, that rear seat experience would be a lot more troublesome.
Great point.
And you would accept it saying, yeah, but I bought the whole maxed out Golf thing, so obviously it's not going to do bad roads. Second, we are not considering this car as a super practical purchase, so we've not really gone into the interiors and the space and the details, but this is going to feel a little de-spec'd for the price versus what you could get for that kind of money. And again, you are paying for the aura, you are paying for the performance, and it is the idea of having a hot hatch in the family that is being sold here. We don't think this is going to be the primary vehicle in a garage for almost anyone at all. This will be your third, fourth, fifth joy car, and it is a joyous experience to drive. It feels good to drive, it sounds nice to drive in sport mode. They're doing something very subtle by just piping a little bit of extra bass into the cabin, which gives you a sense of occasion without it getting loud, intrusive, or disturbing, which can happen. I have driven cars where an M badge was there or an AMG badge was there, but when you put it in sport mode, it became so loud inside that while I was showing off to people, I felt like, yeah, this is the right way to do it. But would you be able to live with it?
Nah.
Not so much, right? Second thing he said is, so if you look at the cabin, it's a sporty looking cabin. It looks nice in that sense. But when you start looking at the equipment in the cabin, the seats aren't powered. Yeah, manually adjustable. There's no ventilation function. So the hot hatch part, it's part of the temperature setup of the cabin also in some ways. So think about it as a very enjoyable car to drive, where the chassis has as much to do with how you enjoy the car as the engine does. And on the handling track, he found the legend that a GTI does not understeer is not actually true. If you drive badly enough, it will also understeer. But if you drive the GTI the way it's supposed to, where you have a little bit of skill and you're trying to have a little bit of fun, and that means you're entering the corners harder, you're loading up the chassis a little bit more, then a front wheel drive car like the GTI can keep understeer out of the picture for such a long time that he was genuinely impressed. And the steering responds really accurately. It's a very direct, feel-some steering. And even when he was making U-turns at the end of the section that was allocated to him for his driving section, the steering starts to become sharper as you steer more, which feels good to drive. So the impression I have is this is a very impressive car to drive, as long as you remember that it's meant to be a accent on top of a good family car rather than the maxed out version of a family car for performance.
Okay.
The difference between essentially buying a Lancer as a family sedan, a Lancer Evolution as a fast family sedan, and then maxing it out and creating the 1000 bhp monsters that we see on social today, right? So idea, good car, good fun to drive. Will it be our primary? Probably not. At 53 lakh rupees, is it an expensive purchase? Yes. Is it a logical purchase? No, you're buying this to have fun. And would you consider this expensive at 53? If you benchmark the spec and trim that we've got versus global market, it's not outrageously expensive either. Overall, if you get a chance to drive a Golf GTI, please do try it out. There is a lot of flavor in this car. But if in your head you're buying like a racing hatchback, it's not that car. 53 lakh rupees.
Okay, so when did I drive the GTI?
You didn't drive the GTI, we experienced the GTI.
When?
We were at the U-turn outside Molsheim, and we were swapping the Veyron for tracking shots, and there was a very loud exhaust note on the mountain, and we were all wondering what it was. And there was a dude in a red old Golf GTI going up and down the mountain with an enormous exhaust, and he was going quick.
Oh, this was wondering when did I drive?
And all of us were standing there smiling, like
The little parking area where we were standing.
that's it. And we were all smiling because you could tell he was coming, because we were trying to get shots. So we didn't want to interrupt traffic. So we'd have to wait for traffic. And he was the one car on the mountain that day that you knew he was coming through, and everybody just stopped, right? Imagine the scene, okay? There's a whole bunch of us driving Veyrons, and we're like, whoa, Veyron, right? And then you hear this Golf GTI, and they're like, hey, Golf GTI. It was very cool. It's a very
Awesome.
cool.
Okay. And in your conversation, I remembered one more thing which we had brought up when we were talking about the Tiguan as well. And just quickly wrap it up. We had somebody in circles who has a Tiguan, and we spoke to him about he gave a great report card, so to speak, about what the experience has been like owning the Tiguan, the previous gen.
Right.
And it ties up exactly with what the people from the company have told us. So the broad strokes are common parts, like let's say bumpers and shock absorbers and things like that, are in ready stock.
Okay.
But things that may be less prone to failure.
Will have to be ordered, and you'll have to wait.
Yeah. And in that, they say that the window that they commit to is 2 to 3 weeks. But depending on where the part is coming from and the availability of
Right.
it can be much quicker. There have been instances where it's been under a week as well.
Right.
So that's broadly how they're dealing with service for these CBU cars, and looking at what the experience was with the Tiguan. I'll try and find that comment and post it here as well so you can see it. And so as long as you're willing to accept that this is not a made in India car where all the parts are going to be available immediately and easily, it will still be a fairly livable experience in terms of the ownership experience. And cost-wise, what was shared in that comment didn't seem exorbitant either.
Okay. Awesome.
So interesting.
Yeah, and for the Tiguan owners, that would be a lot more critical, because that would be a daily driver.
Yeah.
Whereas with a Golf GTI, I would assume that, you'd like to drive it every day, but you're probably in something else most of the time, and you'll be in the Golf some of the time.
Correct.
Right. Just so that we get this through, it does look like a low, sharp car, but it is not that low. There is sufficient ground clearance. You do have to be cautious when the speed breakers become outrageously large, as in India they sometimes would.
And we will check all of this out, because actually, should we be doing a Golf view? I mean, Golf GTI view, does it make sense? Let us know. It will be, I mean, I hadn't really thought about it, but then VW said that the cars would be coming for further testing and later on. So, okay.
Okay. And if you've seen on the channel a new section called Ask MotorInc, in the app and on YouTube, you can ask us questions. Use the hashtag AskMotoring on MotorInc Circles. Then we can pick up those questions and answer them. We are on purpose not going into I'm trying to buy this vehicle and that vehicle kind of questions, because to me that body of questions has people who need specific answers to their peculiar questions, and we'd like to address that as much as possible one-on-one rather than give you global answers. But if you have a doubt about what Kartik said, front wheel cars don't understeer, that's exactly the kind of question we'd like to see on Ask Motoring. I have recorded the first episode already. Kartik is about to record his first episode already, so there is still just a little bit of time for you to get your questions in.
Cool. What's next for you?
So I've just finished riding the Suzuki Access, the electric one. I can't discuss it in any detail at all because at the moment Suzuki doesn't have a price on it. Right. So as I was joking with them, I said, so they said, what do you think about the scooter? I said, for 50,000 rupees, you've just blown my mind. And for 2.5 lakh rupees, it is completely pointless. Right. So we're not going to be recording the MotorInc First on the Suzuki Access, although I have finished riding it because I'm waiting for the price to come. They have said it should take another 10, 14 days. You will probably see stories on the Access on the internet before that. But to us, the whole picture has to be done in one shot. Until then, it is not a first, it's a half. And there's no MotorInc half.
Cool.
Yeah. And actually, that is it for the moment for me. I know that the SMC-R from KTM is coming. I think it's about a month and a half or two away. We are hearing again and again that the Enduro R international spec is also being readied. I don't know what the timeline on that is. But the KTM situation seems to be stable now. So if you had doubts about will KTM survive, should I buy the bike now? Some of those fears should be allayed a little bit. That aside, at least for Suzuki, I can tell you no other products as far as I can tell are coming, because I encountered the Japanese wall of we can't discuss that and you please wait, which I haven't actually in the last 3 years. I think we haven't heard this, but I heard this again. And on the one side, it's a little frustrating, but it was such a huge throwback. I loved it. But we'll discuss that on the Access. I don't want to give it all away.
Cool. Quickly on the cars front, we'll just run this off. We have the Altroz.
And if you have questions about the Altroz, there may be a chance for you to get those questions in. Again, please use circles. There will be a post from Kartikeya's profile, which I have reposted from my profile. If you type in a comment to that, it's the basis on which we take questions from circles. If you're watching this on YouTube and you don't know what QFCs are, questions from circles are, they're a part of every MotorInc First on the app. But the episodes get so long that we don't really put it on YouTube. So if you have specific questions pertaining to a vehicle, please do use circles, leave the queries there, and we'll address them in QFCs.
Yeah. So there's Altroz. Then we also have the Harrier EV coming up. So that's also, but that's slightly delayed, but will be happening next.
Are you excited about the Harrier EV?
Yeah, I am actually. Because we'll finally have a Harrier and therefore by extension a Safari with the all-wheel drive. So even if it's coming in the EV mode finally, an all-wheel drive.
Fair enough. Yeah. Good point.
Cool. Wrap it up.
All right. So that's what we thought about the Volkswagen Golf GTI. A limited number is coming to India. And if you intend to purchase one, it would be nice to see in the comments what the thought process is and what the garage already is to which you're adding the GTI to. And if you're not on that circuit, that's fine. I'd love to know what you think of the GTI badge, how it entered your life, and why you think it is such a special badge. That'll be very, very
awesome.
cool to read.
Yeah. Good one.
I wish there was a MotorInc second, then we could have actually brought those stories into another episode, but we will figure that part out. And until we do, and until we see you the next time on MotorInc First, thank you so much for watching.